Amen. Well, my wife, Alicia, was asking this week, she said, Michael, what are you talking about this week? And I told her that the subject of the sermon would be sex, that we'd be talking about sex. And she said, aw shucks, I'm going to be in childcare this week. And my daughter, Anna, she's 13 years old, and she's well educated in the birds and the bees. We've taught our children from an early age. We teach them, private parts, appropriate versus inappropriate, and at age-appropriate language all the way, we give them an education. And so my two oldest have been the most educated and taught on these things. And so my daughter Anna was in the room. She overheard, of course, the conversation, and I just thought it was kind of funny the way different people react. And when she heard that the topic was going to be sex, and she works childcare the same weeks that my wife does, she said, thank goodness, I'm going to be in childcare. My 11-year-old boy, Hudson, was also in the room. And now 11, he's kind of like right on the cusp with children, and he's still in the kids ministry. He's not normally in here for the sermon. But quite differently from Anna, he actually made a special request to join us for a sermon about sex. He wanted to hear what Dad had to say to the congregation. I think it highlights how everyone processes these things a little bit differently. And, well, hey, I think it's actually kind of fitting that we just had a baby dedication Sunday. I mean, every preacher loves to preach to the choir, right? You guys get it. So everyone responds a little differently, and that's actually okay. And some of you are really eager, like, what is this preacher going to say, and what does the Bible really tell me about this? And you're eager to hear, and others of you might kind of want to shrink down in your seats, and we all have different responses. That's okay. What wouldn't be okay is if I, as the preacher, just never talked about this because sometimes we get uncomfortable with it. For one, it wouldn't be okay because my job is to preach the whole counsel of God, to preach the whole Bible. There's not just certain sections of the Bible where it's that's just not comfortable. So if you've been with us for a while, I don't do that. I don't shy away from things that make some of us a little bit squeamish. But more than that, sometimes silence speaks louder than words. And if a church never talks about this subject, and if a family never talks about this subject, the silence communicates something. The silence communicates that this is a subject that we need to be ashamed about. And if shame enters into the picture, it typically results in one of two responses among Christians who grow up in churches or in families or environments where the subject just isn't talked about. One of the most common is that if I'm not going to be discipled by the people of God, we just go get discipled by the world in this. That's actually the worst thing. And sometimes that looks like experimentation, and sometimes that looks like pornography, which it literally, scientifically, rewires your brain for sexual frustration. It's one of the worst things that anyone could do with regard to experiencing any sort of lasting fulfillment. Now, when I say it's one of the worst things that somebody can do, please hear me. If you came out and you had that addiction and you brought that out into the light, we are a community of grace. We are a people that you can talk about the deepest struggles that you might feel deep shame over, that you might feel deeply embarrassed about. This is a place where people do and have routinely brought age-old secrets out into the light and found healing and power and grace, because shame thrives in the darkness, but it dies in the light. So this is a community where you can do that. At the same time, the world says, that you just have to accept everything, no matter what. And that's not the way it works. Like Nathan preached about this last week, where at one hand, he shows the adulteress grace, and on the other hand, he says, but go and sin no more. And these can actually work together. So it's actually okay for me to say, you know what? Pornography is a terrible and abominable sin that celebrates the abuse of women. It's absolutely terrible. It is. And in the same breath, I can say, if you struggle with pornography or any sexual sin for that matter, there is so much grace, loads of grace, piles of grace in this place. Because we are a community that accepts people because we know we've all got struggles, we've all got faults, we've all got warts. We do. And so on one hand, the response is when we don't talk about it, we go out and we get discipled by the world. And what that does is it creates a script that we have in our brain, sort of marked in our brain, that's going to have to be dealt with in marriage. But then the other thing, if we don't talk about it, and this is actually more common, young people, than you might think if you're just watching the news or whatever, or just listening to people, it might seem as though like nobody's a virgin when they get married. But that's actually not true. And it's actually much more common than it's said. And in fact, the kind of rate of sex before marriage has actually been in decline for a number of years in America, not just among Christians, interestingly enough. But a lot of times a Christian will save themselves for marriage, but they'll enter marriage with this sort of naive idea that anatomy and biology will combine together to automatically create a wonderful and fulfilling sex life. And it doesn't work that way. Nor does it work that if we save ourselves for marriage, like we somehow put God into our debt to owe us a fabulous sex life. We can't put God into our debt, by the way. And that's not the way the Bible talks about sex. It's not the way it talks about lovemaking. Great lovemaking requires great love, and that's hard work. And we'll see that theme throughout our time together. We're going to be in a book called The Song of Solomon, and we're walking through the Song of Solomon. We're in chapter 6, the very end of chapter 6, and into chapter 7. And the Song of Solomon is a book that's dedicated to love and lovemaking. And so we're talking about these things. To just catch you up on the context, first of all, as you can see, well, it was on the screen, I think. The title of this series is A Love for All Seasons, building and cultivating a love that lasts. And so our sexual life is actually a big part of that. And so we're going to pick it up in chapter 6, verse 11. To give you some context, here's what we've been seeing so far. We've been seeing that King Solomon and his wife, she's called Shulamith. So Solomon and Shulamith, they've fallen in love. Chapter 3 is their wedding. Chapter 4, their wedding night. Chapter 5, their first fight. And from chapter 5 to chapter 6, the very end of chapter 6 where we left off, the fight continues. And it doesn't really take the shape of a fight. It's more just like a winter. I've been calling it an emotional winter, a season of emotional separation, of just not deep connecting. And there's a need for forgiveness. There's a need for reconciling. And so it's been building up toward that. And we came just last time to the cusp of the reconciliation moment. And now is when it happens. And so as this scene begins, we'll read first through their reconciliation, which will culminate in lovemaking and invitation for future lovemaking. And so that's going to be how the passage flows. So, chapter 6, verse 11, here's what it says. She says, I went down to the nut orchard to look at the blossoms of the valley, to see whether the vines had budded, whether the pomegranates were in bloom. Before I was aware, my desire set me among the chariots of my kinsman, a prince. Now, just really quickly, I should say, this is all very figurative language, and I'm going to be unpacking these figures for you so you can really understand what's happening. Okay, so the woman has just said, I'm looking for this evidence of springtime. Before she's aware, her desire has captured her. Now, verse 13. The daughters of Jerusalem, the women of the city, her peers, and beyond that, just the women who live there in Jerusalem. They say, return, return, O Shulamite. Return, return, that we may look upon you. The husband says, why should you look upon the Shulamite as upon a dance before two armies? And now, chapter 7, he praises her completely. He says, how beautiful are your feet in sandals, O noble daughter. Your rounded thighs are like jewels, the work of a master hand. Your navel is a rounded bowl that never lacks mixed wine. Your belly is a heap of wheat, encircled with lilies. Your two breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle. Your neck is like an ivory tower. Your eyes are pools in Heshbon by the gate of Bath-rabbim. Your nose is like a tower of Lebanon, which looks down toward Damascus. Your head crowns you like Carmel, and your flowing locks are like purple. A king is held captive in the tresses. And now he'll make a request. How beautiful and pleasant you are, O loved one, with all your delights. Your stature is like a palm tree, and your breasts are like its clusters. I say, I will climb the palm tree and lay hold of its fruit. Oh, may your breasts be like clusters of the vine, and the scent of your breath like apples, and your mouth like the best wine. She says, yes, it goes down smoothly for my beloved, gliding over lips and teeth, speaking of the intoxication of lovemaking. I am my beloved's, and his desire is for me. Now an invitation. Come, my beloved, she says. Let us go out into the fields and lodge in the villages. Let us go out early to the vineyards and see whether the vines have budded, whether the grape blossoms have opened and the pomegranates are in bloom. There I will give you my love. The mandrakes, an aphrodisiac, give forth fragrance, and beside our doors are all choice fruits, new as well as old, which I have laid up for you, O my beloved. That's in the Bible. Did you know that was in the Bible? It's in there. It's in there. It's in the Bible. We preach it. So, here is our approach to unpacking the passage this morning. I want us to talk about 3 obstacles to lasting sexual satisfaction. Sounds kind of like a magazine tabloid cover, doesn't it? But it actually is the theme of this passage. It's how do we build a love that lasts, and what is the role of lovemaking in that, and what are the obstacles that we need to overcome in order to have lasting satisfaction in this area. God actually does have a will for your sex life, particularly married people, that you might be perpetually sexually satisfied. That's what he wants. Okay, you can read about this in many places of the Bible, and one of them is here in the Song of Solomon. And Solomon and Shulamith have 3 obstacles that they have to overcome. And so I'm going to walk us through what these 3 obstacles are so that you can enjoy God's will for your life in this area. Momentary satisfaction is easy for anyone to achieve, but sustained satisfaction is not. It's work. And so here's the first obstacle. Obstacle number one is unresolved conflict. Unresolved conflict. And this comes to the context. Comes back to the context. We've been talking about since chapter 5, there's been an emotional separation, an emotional winter, and Solomon and Shulamith, they don't make love until the end of their reconciliation. It's not until they do business with each other's hearts that they take care of other things. It goes in that order for a reason. In fact, for those of you who were with us 2 weeks ago, perhaps you'll remember that Solomon, his body is ready to go right away. He sees her, he's ready. But then he stops himself and he says, avert your eyes from me, for they overwhelm me. Some translators render it, for they arouse me. His point is, I want to take care of our heart connection first. That's a good husband right there. He actually cares about her. He's not just in this for getting pleasure. That's not what it's about. And that's the way the world looks at sex. That's not the way God looks at sex. It's about a connection of the entire person. It's why he praises her from toe to head in this passage and other passages, head to toe. It's a connection of the total person, the total body. In fact, even the total future. When Christian couples make love, it is God's way, and really, God just designed it for anyone who has sex, that it's our way of saying, I give myself to you, I reveal myself to you completely, I give myself to you completely, I embrace you completely, your past, your present, your future, every part of your body, every part of your personality, I embrace you completely. And so Solomon isn't just concerned about the body here. It's not just about the connecting of body parts. It's about the connecting of hearts. And so he ensures that they reconcile first. And so let's talk about the reconciliation and where that is in this passage, because if you don't understand, if you don't just happen to know ancient Near Eastern metaphor, you might have missed it. So in chapter 6, verse 11, when she says, she goes down to the orchard and she's looking to see if the vegetation is blossoming, if the vines have budded, if the pomegranates are in bloom. This is that ongoing motif of springtime. The motif of springtime, we saw it in chapter 2, where they were falling in love. And there were all these spring metaphors because it speaks of newness. But then they had this dark winter in their love relationship. And so at the end of all that, it's like in chapter 6 earlier, they were being really warm with each other. They were being really kind to each other, but it hadn't happened yet, the reconciliation. And so she's saying, it's like she's assessing the relationship. And she's saying, is winter over yet? Is springtime of reconciliation here yet? And so she's looking for it. And in verse 12, she finds it. It says, before I was aware, my desire set me among the chariots, my kinsman, my prince. And so what's happening here? First of all, in the ancient Near East, not just anybody had a chariot. Okay, it's not like you all got in your car and you hopped in the car and you drove to church this morning. We have a parking lot. There weren't chariot parking lots at the local temple or library, okay? Like, who had chariots? The king. She's talking about Solomon's chariots. And now that she's in the chariot, that speaks of reconciliation. She calls him my kinsman because, again, in the ancient Near East, we saw this in chapter 4 when they made love on their wedding night. He calls her my sister, my bride. And in the 21st century, we're like, sister, no, leave that one out, man. That was kind of really awkward. But in their culture, it's actually really beautiful. What it meant was the marriage bond is as strong as blood. And so they would refer to each other, my sister, my brother, my kinsman, she calls him. And she calls him my prince, so it speaks of his royal status. And when it says, before I was aware, this is sort of like an ancient Hebrew way of saying, Solomon swept me right off my feet all over again. It's the experience of reconciliation. It's the experience of forgiveness. And if you've been married for a long time, you know that it's this way. Anytime that you wrong your partner and you feel really guilty about what you did, and your partner says, I forgive you. Those 3 words are every bit as powerful as the first time you heard that person say, I love you. And so she says, before I was aware, I caught up in Solomon's chariot, and we're swept away. It's the sweeping feeling of how, having been reconciled, springtime is officially here, and it's here through the avenue of forgiveness, the quickest way out of winter. Forgiveness, the fertilizer for springtimes of love. If you can't forgive each other, your relationship stands 0 chance. If you can forgive each other, your relationship stands a great chance. And you say, well, what does this have to do with intimacy and the topic at hand? It has everything to do with intimacy, because if both partners are fighting for the marriage, it will have positive ramifications upon your sex life. And if one partner is not fighting for the marriage, it only takes one to not fight for it. If one partner is not fighting for it, that will have a negative impact upon your sex life, because this is a biblical view of sex, that it is not just about anatomy. It's not just about sexual compatibility. Have you heard that phrase out in the culture? To be crass, the phrase is, you try before you buy. Cohabitation. Most people are doing that these days. Now, they don't look at the statistics that people who cohabit actually have a greater chance of divorce and it not working out if they get married. Try before you buy actually doesn't work. God's way actually works better because it forces you to work on the emotional side of the relationship before you're consummating getting married. So it's not all about the sex when you're dating. It's all about each other and each other's hearts, so that when you're married, everything's put into its proper context. For God, it's not just about anatomy. And it's not about sexual compatibility, which is a lie. Because if you are connecting deeply with your hearts, you won't be able to help yourself but to connect with your bodies also. It's natural. I took a class in college, a nonverbal communication, and they talked about how emotional and physical intimacy move in concert. That's natural. And that's why when people are falling in love, they so want to make love in that stage. And that's why people in the world, I remember they were making fun of me. They're like, you're saving yourself toward marriage? They said, you got that order wrong. You're supposed to have sex before you're married, and then you get married, and then you stop. And I'm like, that's how you do it. No, so we put the brakes when we're not married and the accelerator when we are married. But not just in a physical way, but in a way that is a bringing together of hearts first. And if you prioritize that, it'll have a huge effect on your marriage. Now let me just say, and I have to, sometimes when we talk about these things, and I know this is an area of a lot of pain in people's lives, and so it's hard for a pastor because you want to put like a footnote next to everything. I recognize there are medical issues. There are certain things that like I just couldn't talk about everything. But what I can say is this. What I can say is if both partners are fighting for the marriage, if both partners are fighting for forgiveness, are fighting for reconciliation, are fighting for emotional closeness, it will have very positive effects on physical intimacy. And if they're not, it will have negative effects. That's what this passage is teaching. You might even say that sex is both a cause and an effect of a healthy marriage. It's a cause because spiritually as well as scientifically, it's actually a glue that holds people together. But it's an effect because when two people devote themselves to connecting at a heart level, the bodies follow inevitably. So the first obstacle to overcome is unresolved conflict. Unresolved conflict. The second obstacle to overcome, and I'll show this from the passage, public responsibilities. Public responsibilities. Let's read verse 13 one more time. Return, return, O Shulamite. We'll unpack her name in a couple of weeks. It comes up again in chapter 8. Return, return, O Shulamite. Return, return, that we may look upon you. We'll stop there for a moment. Did you notice the word return repeats 4 times? Why? Anytime you see repetition in the scripture, pay attention. If you see it 4 times, pay close attention. In the context of their reconciliation, in the context of what's happening, the cry from the women who live in Jerusalem is a cry for public engagement. They're saying, return, pay attention to us some more. Return, take another photo op. Remember, this is a royal marriage, right? Let's have another photo opportunity. Shake a few more people's hand. Oh, come on, just one more autograph, just one more hour of civic duty. And so the women who live in Jerusalem, they're putting these constant demands on Solomon and Shulamith, and Solomon won't have it. He says, why will you gaze upon the Shulamite? Why will you gaze upon my wife? In other words, what he's saying is, this isn't your time for a photo op. This isn't your time for more of her. This is our time together. And he actually fights for the intimacy of the marriage. And that's not even just sexual intimacy there. That's just intimacy. That's being close. And in a healthy marriage, there is a healthy balance of public and private time. If you give in to that demand, and parents of young children, like, you get it, right? Because we may not be royal families, right? We don't have like the photo ops and autographs and all of that. But think of public as anything involving other people besides you and your spouse. Think about raising children. Think about going to work. Think about even going to church and relationships that you're fostering and all of the things that you do. Is it not constant? Like, you return, 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 return. Can't you hear it? It's like, the kids' cartoons in the other rooms. Like, okay, sorry. But I'm just saying, it's constant. And it's hard. And if you have young kids, you especially have to fight for that time. Not even just sexual intimacy, but just being together. Just getting a date night. And that's what Solomon is doing. He's saying, this isn't your time. This is our time. And your partner will actually feel fought for. Your partner will actually feel protected, loved, nurtured when you say, hey, I reserved a date night. We're going to this place, or we're going to stay the weekend in this hotel. They're going to feel the love and the affection and your prioritizing. And it's not just Solomon here either. Shulamith also. And for this, we'll kind of jump to the end of the passage that we read, chapter 7, verses 11 to 13. You remember that where I said she invites him for more? She invites him away, she says, to the fields, and will lodge in the villages. She's inviting her husband away for a weekend of lovemaking. And she says, why don't we read verse 13 here. And actually, even before I read the verse, and let me just say, in a healthy marriage, there's a balance in invitations to intimacy. Now, even on that word invitations, that's key. Because lovemaking, as in all things in marriage, as in all things in love, love does not demand. Love requests. Love invites. This is the nature of love. And what happens is one partner gets sexually frustrated and they shake their fist and they yell and they scream and they want to make a demand. That's you're shooting yourself in the foot. That's not the way to do it. It's an invitation, first of all. But she invites him. What I want to point out here is I think sometimes in the church we have this sort of chivalrous view of sex, which, hey, I'm all for chivalry. I want to be a gentleman. Like, that's a good thing. But I think we have this view that kind of takes it over the top, as though only the man should be making requests and not the woman. And where's that from? I mean, from the very first page of the Bible, Genesis 1, he made them male and female. From the very first page of the Bible, he made us sexual beings. Was it just men were made sexual but not women? No, that's falsehood. And what I'll say is that if it's only one partner, even if it's only the woman, or if it's only the man who's inviting the other to have intimacy, the other one will start to feel rejected. Like, the other one doesn't want me. He doesn't want me. She doesn't want me. Because it's never requested. Evaluate your marriage. Is it equal, the requests, the invitations? If anything, the woman invites more in the Song of Solomon, but she's also the protagonist. So I would say 50-50 is appropriate. 50-50. And so she invites him away for a weekend of lovemaking. Verse 13, out into the fields and the villages, so away from the city. Then verse 13, the mandrakes give forth their fragrance and aphrodisiac. It's sort of her way of saying, lovemaking is in the air, my love. And beside our doors are all choice fruits. Fruits are metaphor in the song for sex, sexual pleasure. So when she says choice fruits, she's talking about something she has reserved for him, something that she has set aside exclusively for him. And then she describes these choice fruits as being new as well as old. A number of interpreters understand this to be her playful sexual flirtation, her way of saying, well, I'm going to bring some of the old tricks as well as a few new ones. You want to go to the countryside? Now, I know that's maybe a little bit awkward to talk about in church, but God actually delights in the playfulness of sexual flirtation between a husband and a wife. In fact, if you're low on drive, this really helps. Like, maybe flirt a little bit, before 11 p.m. at night when you make your demand. To have a little bit of a buildup. I mean, it's just part of just humanity, and it's part of the way God made it. But he actually delights in this. He delights in the love, in the interplay, in the creativity, in the fun, in the playfulness, in the flirtation. Love is that way, right? Why can't lovemaking be that way? Okay, and none of us should feel guilty if we've gotten into a rut and it's not happening that way. Consider this an invitation from the Lord where he's saying, hey, I made you a sexual being. I made your spouse a sexual being. Play and enjoy. And this is part of why God made you the way he made you. What I really want to come back to in this passage is that she invites him out, she says, into the fields and to lodge in the villages. That's the main running theme that I want to hit, and that is the theme of country versus city. Country versus city. It comes up again and again and again. The city represents public life and public engagement. The country represents privacy and intimacy, and Solomon and Shulamith cultivating their love away from the other people. And what you see throughout the song is there's an interplay between both of these. It doesn't recommend, for instance, that we move away with our lover and to some deserted island and just drink deep of each other's love and have no public engagements ever, right? It's not recommending that we become hermits. It's recommending balance. There's a balance between public and private life. And I guarantee you, if you ask most people, why don't you make love more frequently in your marriage? What they will commonly say is fatigue. They're just tired. And if you give yourself away, and you give yourself away to all the people who are saying, return, 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 pay attention to me, give me more of your time, give me more of your energy, then at the end of it all, you won't have anything left over to give the most important person in your life. Now, before I got married, I was one of the naive Christians. I assumed that biology would just take over. That, when I heard married people talk about being too tired for sex, I was like, you're JV, man. And then I got married. And you know what? Biology goes both ways. It gives you urges, and it makes you tired. And we have to pay attention to both of those, don't we? Sex isn't just anatomy, nor is it just biology. It's love. It's a sharing of the total person. And the more we work at love, and in this case, fight for intimacy, not just intimacy for lovemaking, but for dates and all the things, the more we fight for it, the more it will be blessed. And I'll tell you this, speaking specifically of sexual intimacy, if one partner stops fighting for it, both of you will be fighting about it. It takes both of you. It takes a sharing of that responsibility. And that's something I didn't understand when I first got married, but it's something that this song communicates. Solomon and Shulamith both prioritize their private lives together, and God blesses them for it. So now, we've had the first two obstacles. The first one, unresolved conflict. The second one, public responsibilities. Isn't it just kind of cool how rich God's word is? I mean, you just think like that, and I love that it's actually a poem. I love that it, and there's a debate over one passage that might have God's name in it, but either 1 or 0 times is God's name mentioned in this song. And there's this ongoing, this repetition in the song where she says, by the does, by the gazelles of the field, do not stir up nor awaken love until it desires. It's like she's purposefully avoiding the Lord's name in swearing, because love doesn't demand. It's not something you just swear to me. She's saying love is something that has to be nurtured. It has to be, you have to be sensitive with it. You have to be patient to it. You have to work at it. And I just love how beautiful it is. I love that it's a poem, that it's a song, because it's not meant to be, I think sometimes we grow up in the church thinking sex is dirty. No, it's not. It's actually absolutely beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. It can be dirty when we let ourselves get discipled by the world, but between a husband and wife, it's a beautiful thing. And so God communicates it in song. Okay, number 3. This is the hardest of all. The hardest obstacle to overcome. Obstacle number 3 is sexual shame. Sexual shame. And this one's going to take us for a little bit of a trip here. I'm just going to be honest. So strap on your seatbelts here. Verse 13. So after requesting that they return, Solomon says, no, why will you stare upon her as upon a dance between two armies? This is a wonderful, beautiful metaphor for reconciliation, like the laying down of arms and the embracing of one another. And yet, I think it's more than metaphor. And from the scholarly literature that I read upon it, if it's not the standard interpretation, this is at least the common or a very common interpretation. What I'm talking about is that the dance that Solomon is referring to is not merely metaphorical. It's actually a dance, like Shulamith dancing for her husband. And I'll tell you why that's the case, okay? So, and why this is a common interpretation. I mentioned earlier that there are 4 total body praises in the song, where it's just like, they're like praising temples and noses. And I mean, some of us are like, I don't know if I want a nose that's like, Pinocchio nose. I can't even remember the metaphor that he used, but it all has meaning in their culture. But there's 4 total total body praises, 3 of them are head to toe. 1 is toe to head. It goes from the bottom up. It's this one. And the interpreter has to ask the question, why is he starting with the feet when every other time he starts with the head? Why is he starting with the feet? Context. Verse 13. What did he just mention? A dance. So it makes sense that he would focus on her dancing feet. As he works his way up, still in verse 1, he describes her rounded thighs as being like jewels. That word thigh, some translations will say hip. It probably is hip because hips are rounded. And then jewels, many translations refer to as ornaments. What Solomon is trying to say is that your hips are both beautiful and in motion, like dangling jewels. 19th century, one of the probably the most famous Bible scholar or Bible commentator of the 19th century, he translates this verse as the vibrations of thy thighs. Sounds like a dance to me. So as he proceeds to verses 2 through 5, praises every part of her body, including her navel, her belly, her breasts. Clearly she is unrobed. Verses 6 through 9, we can see why Solomon has become eager. He requests that they make love. Verses 9 through 10, the lovemaking metaphor here is the consumption of wine, intoxication. Scientifically, interestingly enough, of the 3 sections of your brain, that executive decision-making portion of your brain kind of goes to sleep when you're making love. The other parts of your brain, like the emotional, kind of instinctive parts, they are like, woo, and yet that's actually a good thing. It's actually because it's the way God made us. And they're saying, I'm intoxicated with your love, and sex is actually meant to create that sensation that we are intoxicated with our lover. And so verses 9 through 10, she gives herself to him after dancing for him. Point being that this is not a woman who is ashamed of her sexuality. But the point I especially want to make is that it wasn't always this way for her. Like she didn't just like come out of the gate like dancing for her husband. And also, please know, I'm not like recommending, like, don't make your exhortational takeaway like, guess I got to learn to dance. Like, this is totally not that, okay? You could never do that and have a fantastic sex life. So this is not that. But I think by the end of today, you'll actually see, again, how beautiful this is. Okay, so chapter 1, verse 6, Shulamith remarks about how her skin has been darkened by the sun, and this wasn't like a racial ethnic thing. They were all Hebrew, okay? They're all Jewish. This was in their culture. This was a mark of poverty and of ugliness, to be frank. And so she remarks upon this tan, but the part I want to focus on specifically is she says, my brothers were angry with me, and they put me to work outside. Now, in that culture, the brothers were responsible for overseeing little sis. And it was actually protective. It was actually a good thing in that society because you get all these predators coming in, and they were trying to protect their sister from abuse. But these guys were over the top. The implication of the verse is that they actually sent her out into the field to make her look ugly so that no man would be attracted to her. They were repressing her sexuality. This will come to light later in chapter 8 again, and we'll see that in 2 weeks. But they were repressive of her sexuality in an effort to keep sis pure, so that on the wedding night in chapter 4, she's nervous, she's self-conscious, she's anxious, and Solomon says, again in poetic language, he says, depart from the den of lions and from the mount of leopards. Like, what does this have to do with anything? Well, it's a place of fear. And he's saying, you don't need to fear. He's been gentle. He's praised her in that section from head to toe. He's been sensitive. He's been slow. He's all the things. And so he invites her. He calls her out of that place of shame, calls her out of her shell, so to speak. And And what happens is by the time you get to chapter 7, what we've witnessed from beginning to end is the character development of Shulamith, where she goes from feeling shame over her sexuality because of repressive, religious, probably, indoctrination to fully embracing her sexuality. And so I don't think that the message of chapter 7 is, you better figure out how to dance. I don't think it's that. But dancing, I mean, even step away from a seductive dance for a moment and just think, just dancing, period. Like you go to a wedding and you dance. Like the ones who like really get into it are usually the one who've had a few drinks, right? Like they lose all inhibition. They lose all sense of shame. And usually the best dancers don't have a sense of shame about their dancing skills. I mean, you know, like some of us, when we get out on the dancing floor at a wedding, we're all like, you know, this is it right here. This is it. There's something about dancing that communicates the loss of shame. And that's what's taking place here. What's taking place is Shulamith's development of learning to embrace the way God made her. Even if there are some flaws in the way that she looks, she says, Solomon loves me. And he loves me from head to toe, not just my sexual organs. He loves the complete and total me. And she's learned to trust him over time. I think part of the message here is that all of us bring a script into the bedroom. All of us bring a script into the bedroom. And in a highly sexualized culture, it's usually not a good script. Sometimes it involves our past. Sometimes it involves abuse. Sometimes it involves repressive, religious indoctrination that was maybe well-intentioned but poorly executed. But we walk in with that, and the message is that it's actually a journey to overcome that. It was a journey for Shulamith. And so I'd like to finish by just giving you two things to sort of walk with God in this journey of overcoming sexual shame, which I think is the biggest obstacle. And let me be clear, it's not just for women, it's for men. Trust me, I've been counseling people for 16 years. Okay, so this is for all of us. But two things that, and we could do I could do a weekend seminar on this. So this isn't going to be everything. But I want to give you two ways to overcome this sexual shame. The first one is going to relate to marriage, married people, and the second one is going to be for everybody. Okay? So the first one we've been just sort of touching upon already. God rewrites the script, that script that we inherit, that we bring with us into the bedroom, okay? He rewrites that script of shame through a highly supportive spouse. A highly supportive spouse. A harsh, demanding, degrading partner only reinforces the shame that one already feels. And when I talk about shame, I'm talking about, guilt is what says, I made a mistake. Shame says, I am a mistake. I'm just a deeply flawed human. And God actually intends marriage to be part of the healing of that. In the garden, Adam and Eve were created, and they were naked and unashamed. That is, perfectly vulnerable and perfectly comfortable in their own skin. They sinned, and then shame came into the world, and suddenly it felt like not only did I make a mistake, but I am a mistake. And marriage, and particularly married sex, is meant to be the cure, a healing for that takes place over time. It does require a highly supportive spouse. And usually in my experience in counseling with people, there usually, or often, I will say, is one partner who maybe feels shame more intensely than the other partner. And so I want to just give an exhortation to the unashamed partner, okay? What you don't want to do is you don't want to start making demands. You don't want to start throwing fits. What you want to do is you want to profusely praise your partner, not just the sexual organs, but from head to toe. You want your partner to know you think they're beautiful, you think they're handsome. And honestly, not even just their physical appearance, but all kinds of things. And we see this in other places in the song. In fact, if I had time to go into some of the double entendre, the double meanings, whether it be the neck or the nose, he's praising her character as well. But just praise the person. Verbal praise. Like, sometimes I think we imagine that we as human beings can just convince ourselves to believe enough in grace that shame just goes away. But it's actually really, really helpful to be surrounded by a community of grace, and specifically in marriage, a highly supportive spouse. And so if you're the unashamed partner or the less ashamed partner, praise your partner profusely. Praise them every day and praise them all the time, because your number one responsibility in this area is to show that partner that you're not like the abusers, you're not like the shamers, and maybe you're not like you once were. And you show that just like Solomon does. He's gentle, he's kind, he's profuse in his praise, he's sensitive, he paces himself, he shows that he cares about her. And gradually she learns to trust him. It's just like we've been saying. Great lovemaking is not just about anatomy, it's not just about biology, it's about great love. And that takes work. But in marriage, the way God designed it was so that we might be naked and unashamed again. So that's the first one. And now here's the last one, and we'll finish with this, and this is for everybody. Okay? Not only does God rewrite the script through our highly supportive spouse, but also God rewrites the script through friendship with him. Friendship with him. And on this, I have personal testimony. And that personal testimony is I had my own bad script that God did rewrite. And the script was bad because of failure. The script was bad because of addiction. But I'll tell you what, that last 2 years before Alicia and I got engaged, I actually, by the grace of God, by walking in the light of friendship with God and friendship with other people, by not hiding my shame in the dark, but walking in open-hearted friendships with people who wouldn't judge me, who would encourage me, I'll tell you what happened. I actually did walk for a couple of years in sexual purity before I got married, so that by the time I got married, the script had been rewritten. It had been rewritten by grace. Grace is the antidote for shame. And it's a little bit like, we're all like the people we hang out with. Hang out with Jesus a lot, grace rubs off on you. And it rewrites your script. And I know that because it happened for me, and I've continued to walk in sexual purity. I didn't always before I was married. But Alicia and I did and have, and grace is the only explanation for it. It's the antidote for shame. And the greatest place that we find grace is the cross. At the cross, Jesus was not just beat. He was not just whipped. He was not just pierced. He was actually stripped, and he was mocked, and he was hung naked up on a pole. Have you ever wondered why? If what Jesus had to do, without the shedding of blood, there's no remission of sins. If our forgiveness required the shedding of blood, why couldn't Jesus have just been beheaded? Why did he have to go through emotional torture in addition to physical torture? The wonderful answer is that Jesus didn't just come to bear our sin. He came to bear our shame. He came to bear our shame. He hung on a cross, naked and put to shame, so that you and I could be naked and unashamed, not only in the bedroom, but at the core of who we are, as male and female, made in the image of God, as sexual beings, as human beings, embracing the way God made us. Grace sets us free to be who we are because Jesus loves us just like we are. And the more we walk in friendship with him, the more that grace just sort of rubs off on us, and the more Jesus rewrites our script. Let's pray.